Hold up. My views are my own. You heard it here first. You heard it here first. You heard it here first. Lightning round. Dangerously close.
My guest today is TJ Raphael. TJ Raphael is a seasoned investigative audio journalist focusing on the intersection of health, politics, and science. So she has 15 years of experience as a reporter, producer, and editor working with some of the world's leading podcast production houses. I kind of said that weird, but
feel free to do another take.
The people that listen to this already know that every time I do a bio, I'm all over the place. It's one of my it's like a signature thing of mine.
I love that.
But today we are talking about her hit podcast, The Pill Plot. The show was picked by Apple as one of the most loved podcasts of 2022. The Pill Plot has reached number 42 in Apple's coveted true crime chart and earned attention and acclaim from outlets like The Guardian, Vulture, Jezebel, and NPR. What's up, TJ?
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much
one thing I want to let you know is Biohacked was one of the most loved of 2022, not The Pill Plot. So just in case you do a pickup later, I want to let you know. Even though I wish it would have been included in this year's list, The Pill Plot, but it sadly wasn't. But yeah.
Well, it is on my list of one of the best podcasts that I have listened to in 2023. Although this is 2024, but that's when I listened to it. So anyway,
yeah,
blah blah blah. Yeah, and you know what else TJ stands for is how totally joyous I am to have you on the podcast.
I am really happy to be here. It's a Friday. It's not freezing in New York City. So, we're already off to a great start for the weekend. So I'm really glad to be here, and thank you for inviting me on the show.
Yeah, thanks. Same thing here in Nashville. There was an ice storm. We were basically like snowed in here, and now it's like beautiful out. I'm actually gonna get some outside time today because I can.
Yeah.
Before we get super into it, I just want to say I was telling you before we started recording that I'm a little bit embarrassed to say this because I feel like I should have known some of the stuff, but this story about how the abortion pill came to America, like I didn't know practically any of this. It was all new to me. I was just like, because I know this was all like really huge news in the 90s, and it's kind of weird that like I never even knew the name Larry Later, any of this stuff. So
right. But, I mean, I feel actually the same exact way. I have covered reproductive health throughout my career. When I was at WNYC, working on The Takeaway, which was a national daily news show then, I was constantly pitching stories about, abortion or, reproductive health, birth control, whatever. And then I made an entire series about sperm and egg donation, 12 episodes. I spent 5 years reporting on that show. And yeah, I had still never heard this story about how the abortion pill came to the United States. And frankly, I'm surprised that I still am not hearing more about this particular story, given that the Supreme Court is about to decide whether the abortion pill can maintain its FDA approval. And yeah, basically how I came to this story was I had just wrapped in, this was in 2022. I just wrapped production on Biohacked Family Secrets about sperm and egg donation and kind of the shady world behind that. And I was looking for my next story. And then in June of 2022, the Supreme Court announced that it was overturning Roe versus Wade. And I knew I wanted my next project to be about abortion in the United States. As I mentioned, I had done, segments and stuff like that earlier in my career, but I'd never tackled like a full series on the subject. And so I was searching for a story. The lead time for my projects is usually about a year. I usually spend around a year reporting and working to put things together. And so I was coming from a place of like, okay, it's June 2022. What's going to feel relevant in a year from now? And yeah, I started to look towards the abortion pill. I knew that the medication accounted for more than half of all pregnancy terminations nationwide, not surgery. Most people in the United States, that's how they end their pregnancy. So I started looking into the pill. I knew it would be the next battleground in a post-Roe era, which it did become. A few months after I started my reporting, anti-abortion groups sued to remove the FDA approval for the abortion pill, and that's the case that's going to go be decided by the Supreme Court now. But yeah, I knew it was going to be the next big thing because of the fact that it was the way that most people ended their pregnancies. And that goes from, if you remove the FDA approval for the abortion pill, that means people in, places where abortion rights are still strong, think New York, California, Colorado, Illinois. That means people in those states wouldn't be able to get access to that medication as well. And also I knew it was going to be a big deal because in states where now abortion is banned and illegal, you can ship a pill to someone and it's a lot harder to figure out if someone's having an abortion. And especially if you're a person who can't maybe drive to another state or fly to another state, that might be the only option. So I knew that this would be a big deal going forward. But what I found really surprised me. I never expected to find a story like this.
Yeah. I am very aware of like what's happening now in modern times. It's just the story of where like I like I don't want to sit here and say like I think I'm an ignorant person or thing, but like I just kind of assumed that they invented mifepristone. Is that how you pronounce it? Mifepristone.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just assumed that it got invented in a lab, and then because Roe v. Wade in the 70s, I just figured it was one of those things where they were like, oh, okay, well now we have this, and I didn't know there was a battle. So I guess just going into it in 1992, a wealthy elderly gentleman and a young anarchist punk engaged in an international drug smuggling operation that would change America forever. But before they did that, can you describe what it was like in 1991 for women's health clinics dealing with anti-abortion protesters?
Yeah, so in the late 80s and in the early 90s, there begins to be this rise of a real militant sect of the anti-abortion movement. They modeled themselves off after the so-called rescue movement, and they decide that they are going to physically blockade people from accessing abortion clinics. They want to shut down abortion nationwide, and they decide to carry out these massive protests in cities around the United States, and where they would chain themselves to clinic doors. They would bring thousands of people into the streets to block clinic entrances, and women who were trying to access the clinic would be shouted out, harassed, would have to physically move through crowds of people yelling things at them. And one of the prominent groups of this militant sect of the anti-abortion group was a group called Operation Rescue. And it was led by this man named Randall Terry, who was very charismatic and really called people to his cause. And throughout the late 80s, they were doing these mass protests, but really the kind of crescendo moment is in 1991 when Operation Rescue carries out what it calls the Summer of Mercy. And so the Summer of Mercy is a mass protest in Wichita, Kansas. It's in the heartland. It's a great place to draw people from neighboring states who oppose abortion to come out into the streets. They can hop in their car, get to Wichita pretty easily. And they plan on going to Wichita for 6 days, and they wind up being there 6 weeks. The city becomes overrun, and they cap off this 6-week-long campaign in Kansas with a 30,000 person rally that is attended by Pat Robertson, who was a darling of the evangelical right. And some pretty major players wind up wading into the battles at the clinic on the ground in Wichita, including Jay Sekulow, who was Donald Trump's personal lawyer and lead attorney during his first impeachment trial. And currently, Chief Justice John Roberts, at that time, he's then Deputy Solicitor General at the Justice Department, a pretty high up position. And he actually defends, publicly on, I think it was on PBS NewsHour, the, tactics that Operation Rescue is using. And he, signs off on a brief that from the Justice Department that says, people have no constitutional right to enter a clinic. And so this is really the landscape that women and other pregnant people were facing when they tried to access reproductive health care at a clinic at this time. And also what the clinic workers themselves were dealing with when they were, trying to go into work every day. So it was a really, scary time, I think, based on my interviews with people. It was frightening. And it wasn't easy. These people, were militant. And Randall Terry, who I mentioned earlier, he said that the national right to life, they were the softies, they were the Judases of the pro-life movement, that they weren't going hard enough or strong enough. I don't know many people that would think of the national right to life as an organization that's, too light on abortion.
Oh, you would never
he
think of them
did.
would think of them as a tolerant group of people.
Yeah. So that kind of just, says it all right there that, um, Operation Rescue, the so-called rescue movement, more generally, there were other groups as well, but they're prepared to go extreme and really bring this into the streets at this time.
Because just to begin with already, surgical abortion can already be an extremely difficult experience. But anti-abortionists are trying to make it impossible by burning down clinics, physically blocking entrances with angry mobs, like you said, especially like in the Wichita scenario. Uh, and eventually they start assassinating doctors when when the violence starts to escalate. Uh, However, this could all be avoided with the drug mifepristone, uh, otherwise known as RU-486. That was the original name for it. Legal throughout Europe and China, but still outlawed in what seemed to be kind of a puritanical United States in the 1990s. Um, so going back to what my little introduction with the elderly gentleman and the anarchist punk, that man's name was Larry Lader. He had a plan. What was Larry Lader's plan to first bring the pill into the country?
Yeah, so I mean, Larry Lader, he seemed like he was a real interesting character. Like when I first came to the story, I was like, wow, this sounds like the plot to an Ocean's 11 movie. Like it just was blowing my mind. And
Yeah,
Larry Lader would have been, the George Clooney character. I mean,
yeah.
he was wealthy. He lived in, Manhattan. I actually visited the apartment that he lived in with his wife. His wife is still alive. Later died in 2006. Like their apartment was amazing. They had original Guggenheims. Like his wife was like, "Oh yeah, Peggy Guggenheim gave that to us." Like when we were visiting her in Europe, and I was like, "I'm dead right now." Like I can't
Wow.
believe that. But yeah, he's like this. He went to Horace Mann. Kind of grows up in New York society, and he's wealthy enough that he doesn't need to actually have a job. He can devote himself to this issue full time as an activist. And so, given that he is this abortion rights activist, Betty Friedan, who is a storied women's rights activist, she actually called Larry Lader the father of the abortion rights movement. If she was the mother or other women were mothers in the movement, he was, the father of it. And he, later had started out in his career as a journalist, and he then veered more into activism, and he wrote a book simply called Abortion in the 1960s. And that book was actually cited in the Roe versus Wade decision 8 times. Larry's book, of course, was not the entire rationale for Roe versus Wade, but it was certainly considered very seriously by the justices at the time.
Mhm.
And later, early in his career, he writes the official biography of Margaret Sanger, who was the founder of Planned Parenthood, was extremely influential in bringing the birth control pill into the United States and other kinds of contraception, like condoms, like diaphragms. Sanger was a key architect of overturning laws that, prohibited those materials. And so at the end of Sanger's life, Larry goes and spends time with her in a retirement home in Arizona, and details her life story. And in his series of interviews, he hears about Sanger's plot to, in the early 1900s, overturn restrictions on access to contraceptives. And Sanger's plot at that time, involves getting a package of pessaries, which is like a diaphragm, mailed to her from a doctor in Japan. But she wants the government to know that she's getting these pessaries mailed to her, so that she can intentionally be caught and then bring a case through the courts. And so, flash forward to 1991, Larry, the abortion pill is introduced in 1988. So by 1991, 92, Larry sees that the Bush administration has put a federal ban on the drug in the United States. The Bush administration says, no one is allowed to import it, even a small amount for personal use. If you or I were to go to Germany and get some aspirin that wasn't FDA approved in the United States, we'd be allowed to bring it back for our own personal use.
Yeah.
If I got one, bottle of aspirin, or even if I had 2 pills of aspirin, I'd be allowed to bring that into the United States. Which is how it has been for a long time. But the Bush administration says, no, you can't do that with the abortion pill. You can't even have a small amount for personal use. So Larry looks to his muse, his inspiration, Margaret Sanger, and says, well, what if we go to Europe, get these pills, and then intentionally alert US Customs that we're flying back with them, and then we get searched by federal agents, maybe we'll get arrested, and we bring this case all the way up to the Supreme Court to overturn this ban on this medication that could really expand abortion access. Because again, if you don't have to go physically to a clinic to get the procedure, you can take it at home. That's a huge expansion.
Yeah.
So that's what Larry's plan is. But, he needs to find a pregnant woman to do this because,
Yeah.
he can't get a prescription or get the abortion pill for himself. The whole thing hangs on getting a pregnant woman to sign up to do this. And that turns out to be, one of the great challenges of Larry's plan, which has that Ocean's 11 feel, I think, to it, where it's like he's got to assemble this team, he's running around the country. But yeah, that's kind of the
A
basis
seemingly
of the plan.
impossible task to
Yeah.
to find someone who's not, they have to be pregnant, they have to want an abortion, they have to be willing to fly with him to London, risk being arrested, and then get their face on the news in an extremely hostile environment. It's such a wild, I think you refer to it as, or maybe they refer to it as, trying to find a Jane Roe.
Yeah, they called it the Jane Roe for the 1990s. So, Roe versus Wade, it was named after, the woman whose pseudonym was Jane Roe. And so they wanted a Jane Roe for the 1990s. And yeah, I mean, not only is it's like, okay, there's this extremely hostile and violent environment that everyone is living in around abortion access. Yeah, you've got to be down for shouting from the rooftops hey, I want an abortion.
Yeah.
And being the public face of the effort to overturn this abortion pill ban. But also, one of the crazy things to me was it had to be done so quickly. The abortion pill at that time could only be used through the end of the 8th week. It's a little different now. Some countries allow it up to, I think, 15 weeks. Other countries are 12 weeks. I think we're trying to go back in the United States to a point where it would be actually about 7 weeks, which is, extremely early, but a lot of people don't even know that they're pregnant at that time. But at that time, that's what it was, because it was a new medication. I think, regulators wanted to be on the conservative side with, as it related to when someone could take it. So yeah, if you sign up, if you're the prospective Jane Roe and you find out that you're, a month pregnant, you've just missed your period, you only have a couple weeks to do the entire stunt, to go to Europe, to get the pill, to fly back, meet customs, get stopped, and then go all the way up to the Supreme Court. So that alone is wild to me, because I feel it's a crazy timeline to pull off a stunt like this. And then you add in all the other logistics. But yeah, so that's Larry's plan. And I actually acquired a lot of his original materials. I went up to Smith College in Massachusetts. In their library there's the Lawrence Later archives. His wife had donated his, life's work, his papers to the school when he passed away in 2006. And, so I found original documents from his attorneys begging him to do literally anything else.
Yeah.
They're like, this is a bad idea.
Yeah.
They're like, you could be arrested, you could be sent to jail, to prison, and like you're gonna be violating the law on camera. Like there's no argument for defense here, especially given you know who you are, you know the law, you know that this is illegal. So you're like intentionally breaking the law in a very public way, which is like obviously not advisable.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the plan of how Larry Lader cooks up this plan to overturn the ban on the abortion pill in the early 90s.
It's funny to me that you say Ocean's 11 because I can visualize this in much the same, like how they do the cinematic effects in that film where it's like they're getting on the plane and they do the swipe screen. He's in London getting the pills. He's on a payphone snitching on himself to customs. Like
Yeah, it's just like, as I mentioned earlier, like I was really surprised when I found this story. Like I actually, the way that I had come across it in my early research when I was looking into mifepristone, and I was thinking, what's a story here I could build into a series? And I found this story honestly as a footnote in an academic paper. Like, footnotes are written really small, and
yeah.
I was like, wait, what is this? And then I started, kind of pulling the string, and I was like, oh my God, the string led me to this vast web of activism, and I was pretty blown away. And yeah, I couldn't believe I had never heard this story before.
Yep. Not only because one, it's such an exciting and interesting story, and the plan is cool. It's a cool idea, like but also it's important. It's like it's one of the main motivators to get that. This is what gets this into the media. Some people had never even heard of mifepristone or RU48. They used to call it RU486 after the manufacturer, I believe. And this is like that's one of Larry's things is he's media savvy and he likes being in front of the camera. So he's a lot of this is like because even though it was not a full success because yeah, they get the pill here. They breeze through the first judge, and he's like, no, she should be allowed to have that. But they keep pushing it up to the Supreme Court, at which point George Bush has instated Clarence Thomas, and that he gets his hands on it. That's the end of that. If you don't mind, I want to kind of rewind back a second when you were talking about the I'm forgetting the name of the group. They're the anti-abortion group led by Randall Terry. What are they called?
Operation Rescue.
Operation Rescue. So Randall Terry, a man with a dream to someday be on the Phil Donahue show, in his own words. I found that to be funny. I mentioned that to a few people when I was listening to the podcast. Most people don't even know who Phil Donahue is. If I think if you're under 35, it's unlikely that you. But I think in the 90s, he was. I might be talking out of school here a little bit. I'm not crazy familiar with that, but I think he's like on the scale from like Jerry Springer to Oprah. He's kind of like around a Maury Povich type thing. So I kind of thought it was kind of funny that Randall Terry, that was really his highest aspiration, was to one day be on Phil Donahue, and that God told him that he would be there.
Right.
And I think
Randall wanted media attention. He was very smart in his strategy where, he said to me at one point, politicians don't read the letters that are sent to them.
Yeah.
They don't return the calls if you call their office, but they do watch the evening news and they do look at the front page of the newspaper. And so Randall, in his quest to attempt to end abortion access in America and stage these, he said, if I stage massive protests, the news will come and they will show it on television, and it will make it seem like there's a lot of people who are really upset about this, and politicians will pay attention. And so yeah, I mean, he wanted, in the late 80s and into the 90s, Phil Donahue was a massive afternoon talk show, like you said, like Oprah, like Jerry Springer. Like he was right up there in terms of ratings. Like they were in ratings races at that time. And so, Randall wants to get, one of the reasons he wants on Donahue is because he knows he's going to be reaching millions of people, all over the country and be in their living rooms and spreading his message
Yeah.
to end abortion. And so, to Randall's credit, he was incredibly media savvy.
I, I
And
would, yeah,
he,
I would.
he did that by saying a lot of can I curse in this
You
podcast
can say whatever the
or
fuck you want on this
okay.
podcast.
Okay. He said a lot of inflammatory shit. Like he
Yeah.
was intentionally being incredibly inflammatory because he knew that, the media would want to cover it.
I may I bring a couple quotes up that really
Yeah.
stood out to me that because you interviewed Randall and he seemed very really open and pleased to be speaking with you. Like I get a little bit of the impression that Randall likes media. Like you said, he's not only is he
Yeah.
good at it, I think he very much enjoys the attention. That's just me. I don't know Randall personally.
I agree. I would say after talking to him for like 5.5 hours, yes, he loves media attention.
Wow, you talked to him for 5.5 hours. You got a lot
Yeah.
of quotes, and yeah,
Yeah.
like I said, he's a recurring character. He's still at it today. Obviously because you were just talking to him not that long ago for 5 hours. Uh,
Yeah.
Two of the quotes from Randall that really stood out to me were one where he said the Dobbs decision overturning Roe versus Wade was equally as heroic as the Normandy landing in World War II, which I found to be quite a statement. And the one that really got to me, of course, this is a whole story unto itself. I won't go too far into it because it's not that important to the pill plot necessarily. But after he manipulated one of his followers into trying to hand a human fetus in a plastic to-go box to Bill Clinton while Bill Clinton's out on a jog, he's running for president at this time. Uh, he said that stunt was the same thing that former running back for the Dallas Cowboys, Emmitt Smith's mother, would have done. I I just find that wild. But so you spoke with him for 5 hours. What is your What is your take? Who is Randall Terry? What is because I know that I keep rambling, but I just want to say sometimes I'm curious. Is he genuinely into this? Does he care, or is he actually? Does he just want to be in the spotlight?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, Randall told me, and we play some of this in the last episode, like he said, he's like, I don't care about women's health. I don't care. That's not why I do this. Like, I want to end abortion, period. And he's like, people on, in the quote unquote pro-life movement who are like, let's introduce some legislation to like make it harder for clinics to operate because we care about women's health. Randall was like, bullshit. I don't, you don't care about women's health. I don't care about women's health. I care about ending abortion. So, Randall's in this to end abortion. His motivations, he says that God directed him to do this, that he believes that the Bible says, that the God hates the shedding of innocent blood, and he interprets that to mean that God does not support abortion or wants it happening. But Randall loves, he loves media attention. Something I didn't include in the podcast, but came up during our conversations is, I talked to him about like what was his early life like. And he, grew up in Western New York in a Rust Belt town, and he drops out of high school around age 16. This is in the 1970s. And he starts hitchhiking around the country with a guitar, and his goal is to get to California and to be a musician.
Oh,
And, as
I
he's
would not
sort
have
of,
guessed that.
as he's sort of hitchhiking around the country, he's like hanging out with hippies, sort of new age spiritual, folks. And he's like sleeping on the beach in Texas, like on the Gulf of Mexico. And so, initially he just wanted to be famous, it seemed like to me, but the music career didn't work out. And so he comes back home to Western New York, and he's working at an ice cream shop, and some guy comes into the ice cream shop and is like, hey, do you want to learn about the Bible? And Randall's like, okay. And then he goes down this path. I mean, he was not raised particularly religious at all.
Wow.
So yeah, I think that, Randall loves to be in the spotlight. I think that had he and this is obviously me speculating, had he not found religion at this time in his life, he might have tried to be in the spotlight in a completely different way. I mean, it seems like,
Yeah.
you know, maybe this was his route to get the fame and attention he wanted, and it just so happened to present itself as an opportunity. But, had something else happen, he might have never gone down this path. So, I think he's very motivated by attention and by fame in a big way. And as he said, he's like, it's not about women's health for me, it's about ending abortion, which, I find it challenging to be able to separate the two, but he's somehow done it in his head.
I So I had to Google him. I was
Mhm.
it was it had to be done. The photograph that when you Google Randall Cherry, the first one that pops up is a picture of him in a fur coat with a gold chain. Not the image I expected to see. Like I really, but it all starts to kind of click a little bit more once I saw him like smiling in a fur, like kind of dressed like Kid Rock from like the 90s, and I was like, okay, I get it a little bit more, I think. So look, I'm not going to sit here and badmouth Randall Terry all day. Like, clearly I don't agree with him, and I would never dress like him. I know I said that I wasn't going to say anything more about it, but one last thing I do want to bring up, because it's a thing that people are more and more noticing and bringing up, that there is such a long list of people who failed as entertainers, comedians, musicians, that become right-wing extremists because it is such a easier place to become a uh, famous person. So I don't know. I guess fame
Right.
is a powerful motivator.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like, in researching, in speaking to him and also researching his background and kind of fact checking, his life, so to speak. Yeah, like he wasn't raised like he was raised Catholic, but like his, parents were kind of the Catholics that go to church on Christmas and Easter, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so it's not like he was like, steeped in, evangelicalism from a child, and felt that this was an integral part of his life. Yeah, he was in the 1970s hitchhiking, probably smoking weed, playing the guitar, hoping to make it to California, and fails, and then sees
Yeah.
his on-ramp here. So yeah.
Yeah. I guess there was his first big break was he went into an abortion clinic, chained himself to probably some very expensive machine or something like
Yeah, like the exam table. Like,
yeah.
if you go into a doctor's office, you sit on the exam table, like he and his buddies. This was in 1986 in Binghamton, New York. He, goes in. He had become obsessed with this clinic. He actually got an apartment in the neighborhood nearby so he could go over whenever he wanted, very frequently, to
Yeah.
protest outside. But he found that his protests, it was a very small contingent that he was with. It was maybe, a dozen people max, probably on some days, maybe two or three of them. And they were protesting outside this clinic. And it wasn't really getting a lot of attention. It wasn't grabbing, headlines and things like that. And so Randall realized he needed to go bigger. So yeah, him and his friends go into the clinic, walk past the receptionist, go down the hallway into the exam room. They have these huge, like hulking metal chains, and they lock themselves to the exam room, to, equipment, to chairs. And they're like, we're not leaving. And the police are called to get them out of there. The police say, please leave now. And they say no, and they refuse to get up. And so they have to get bolt cutters to saw through the locks. And then even after they get the locks off, Randall, his strategy at that time and then also going forward was to go completely limp so
Yeah.
that the protesters had to be physically carried out of the building. And so, that first initial stunt, Randall gets on the local news. He gets on like whatever, probably News 12, for an evening segment, and that's his first real taste of media attention.
Yeah.
And that's his playbook and his MO going forward. Stage these outrageous stunts and really disrupt care. So even though that day in 1986, Randall didn't end abortion nationwide, but he was able to disrupt that clinic enough that it couldn't function for hours. And maybe somebody, who was supposed to go in for an abortion that day, or maybe even just get a prescription for birth control or have a regular exam, they were not able to get those services that day.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe if you did show up for your appointment and you saw the police were there, you might not want to come back to that place. So, it's unfortunately effective in that sense, where it's at least a disruption and potentially could deter people because it's frightening to them.
Yeah. And once again, there's such an argument for allowing mifepristone into, like, so people don't have to go through these traumatic nightmare experiences with these protesters. But yeah, like I said, getting on that first that taste of getting on the media, that probably feels good. And then in Wichita, 30,000 people following you, that's power. That's, and
Yeah.
power is addictive. But back to Larry and Leona.
Yeah.
Larry and Leona's attempt to bring the pill into the country, like we said, it would have possibly worked as they sued their way through the court system. However, a newly appointed for life Supreme Court Justice, Clarence Thomas, finally gets his hands on the case at the end. At the same time, Ellie Schmiel and Patricia Ireland have headed to Europe with a completely different strategy. What was their plan?
Yeah, so Ellie Smeal, she's actually still at it. She's still the head of the Feminist Majority Foundation. She's in her 80s now. But the Feminist Majority Foundation is, a women's rights group. They advocate for all different kinds of causes, whether it's abortion rights or violence against women or registering, more women to vote and run for office. So Ellie's the leader of that group. And then Patricia at that time was the president of the National Organization for Women, or NOW now. And yeah, they're like, okay, Larry, like, media attention is great. It's interesting to me. I feel like Randall and Larry are kind of foils in that way, where they're kind of doing these outrageous media stunts to get attention, but albeit for completely different reasons and on the opposite sides of the same field. And but yeah, so Patricia and Ellie are like, okay, like, media attention's great. We love that. But we also need actual policy change. We need to persuade the European manufacturers of this drug who hold the patent to bring it to the United States market. And so they actually had traveled to Europe several times over the course, I think beginning in 1989, after the Bush administration institutes its ban. And they are trying to persuade the European drug makers to submit an application to the FDA, because they think that this will be, the easiest and most direct way to get the pill approved in the United States. No surprise here, pharmaceutical companies have a lot of money. They have lobbyists, they have lawyers. Like, they can, if they really wanted to, put their finger on the scale in the United States to try to pressure the US government as, a pharmaceutical lobby to bring this drug into the country. But they say no. They're like, we see what is happening in the United States. It feels like maybe the US is just, too backwards here because of the violence, because of the harassment. Anti-abortion activists actually were harassing employees in the parking lot in Paris of, people who worked at this pharmaceutical company, saying, don't sell the pill. So, in Europe, they're getting harassment too for being associated with abortion rights. And so, Ellie and Patricia, and as well as other women leaders, are consistently going to Europe and trying to convince them that, hey, actually, Americans would really welcome this drug and they would really like it. But the European makers are like, it's just too messy. And also the CEO of the German company, he was a man named Wolfgang Hilger. And he was personally opposed to abortion. He was Catholic, and he saw the opportunity to make money from the pill, which is why the company sold it. But he's like, I don't actually feel passionately about expanding this as much as possible. So he was like, no, we're not going to submit an application to the FDA. And so, while Larry is kind of doing these daring stunts, Ellie and Patricia, who were allies with Larry, and were working with him, they're doing the background policy stuff, greasing the wheels in the halls of power to try to move the ball forward. But it still takes an extremely long time. The pill, the abortion pill, is not eventually approved until September of 2000. And so like we were just talking about 1992, like,
Yeah.
the pill's already been on the market for like I think 4 years at that point, and it still takes an extremely long time. But yeah, they had gone to Europe to they'd taken, because this is the 90s, boxes of paper petitions, 115,000 petitions, individual pieces of paper, shipped them to Europe, brought them into their meetings, and said, look
Yeah.
at all the people that have signed these petitions wanting, saying allow this drug to come to the United States. And the company, still said no. So yeah.
This one thing that just popped into my mind too, because this company also invented Allegra, the
Oh
allergy
yes.
medicine, and the anti-abortion. I don't know if it was one individual group or just I don't know how they managed to pull this
It
off,
was
but
it
they
was the National Right to Life Committee, actually. Yeah.
the tolerant ones.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, they managed to threaten the release of Allegra. Allegra was obviously going to be one of the biggest money makers they could,
Mhm.
one of the because at the time was at like probably the most advanced allergy medication that probably was coming
Yeah.
out, and they're like, this is a $1 billion project. We're not going to because yeah, they were like, we will boycott you, we'll destroy Allegra if you dare to submit an application to the FDA. So they backed off. Like, it's incredible the kind of power these people were wielding through threats and uh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, National Right to Life takes out a full page advertisement in USA Today, which, is at that time was one of the biggest circulation newspapers in the country. And basically, in that advertisement, threatens, the European makers of Allegra, and is like, we will try to block your application to bring Allegra to the United States if you continue selling the abortion pill. And so, there, from a business perspective, the abortion pill was, it was a ticking time bomb. It was like nobody wanted to touch it. Like, oh, if we, the European makers had several different drugs in their portfolio. The abortion pill was just one tiny little piece. Like, pharmaceutical companies don't just make one kind of medication. They make all kinds of medication, whether it's prescription or over the counter, whatever.
Yeah.
And yet, because they have this one drug that deals with abortion, it could cost them billions of dollars with Allegra. And so I think it just says, how radioactive the issue of abortion is in the United States. I mean, even just recently, like, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, there was conversations about Walgreens, trying to make the abortion pill available without a prescription. But then they got threats and they said, we're not going to do that. And, so even today, even though polls show that the majority of Americans do support abortion access, I mean, we can see that in recent elections. And since Roe has been overturned, when the issue is put on the ballot, it wins. So even though, like, you have this evidence that like people support it, pharmaceutical companies are just like, it's too much drama and they care about their bottom line. So they often don't want to wade into the issue,
Yeah.
even though, we've never lived in a world where abortion doesn't exist in one form or another. The abortion pill theoretically could be a moneymaker, because I think a lot of people who want to terminate their pregnancies would rather take a pill than undergo a surgery. I
I would
also think,
imagine that almost everybody would prefer that choice.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think so. I've never had an abortion. I've never been pregnant before, so I can't speak to it personally. But I imagine if I needed or wanted to get an abortion for some reason, yeah, I would probably choose to have a pill instead of go under anesthesia and have a surgery. I also think, like, you look at the statistics, like 54% of pregnancy terminations in the United States today are done by the abortion pill. It is the choice of many people. And I also think it speaks to the fact that, like, the pill is used to terminate early pregnancy. Like, most people, when they do find out, and if they do not want to have or cannot have the child for whatever reason, they go as soon as possible to try to get,
Yeah.
abortion medication. As it relates to surgery, you have to actually wait longer, because you have to wait until the fetus develops a little bit more for them to be able to safely remove all of it. And so like it just doesn't kind of always make sense to me. I'm like, so you would rather like you people that are against abortion, you'd rather like eliminate the abortion pill, wait until like a fetus becomes more developed, and then allow, like, or maybe I guess they don't want it at all. But yeah, I don't know. It just
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to me.
Well, and I guess too, this I guess going back in time again, but also this makes me recall there was a very famous doctor who he was one of the only people that would do late term abortions. That is almost always because it's for the it's like to save the life of the mother, or perhaps like I mean, there's all kinds of things like the child is possibly has not developed a skull or something where it's just
Right.
it's just the humane and right thing to do. Uh, but I know we're jumping around in time,
Yeah.
but we're going way back in time now to Bill Clinton is finally elected. He is outspokenly pro-choice at this time. It appears as though things are going to take a turn for the better for the pro-choice movement. This, of course, infuriates the anti-abortionists into a period of escalated violence. And we talked a lot about Randall, but Randall never really seemed to get his hands dirty exactly. We could say maybe he directed or encouraged others to do violence. So possibly the most notable violent anti-abortionist at this time is Shelley Shannon. Uh, can you tell us about who Shelley Shannon was and what she did?
Yeah, so Shelley Shannon, she was a stay-at-home mom in Oregon, and she'd moved around a lot, both as a child. She attends like 13 different schools by the time she's 12. In high school, she gets involved with an older married man. She becomes pregnant. She winds up having the child. She doesn't stay with that man. She marries a military guy named David Shannon. And since he's in the military, they move around quite a bit again. They finally settle in Grants Pass, Oregon. And, Shelley's, at home, she's looking to socialize outside the house a little, maybe make some friends. I can imagine, having some young kids being in a new town, being kind of isolated. And so she starts attending services at non-denominational evangelical churches in the Grants Pass area. And this is in, I would say closer to the mid to late 1980s. And it's there that she watches an Operation Rescue recruiting video, and she decides to become involved in the anti-abortion movement. She travels to Atlanta in the late 1980s with Operation Rescue to protest the Democratic National Convention in Georgia. That Actually, let me refocus. So she travels to Atlanta in the late 1980s with Operation Rescue to protest the Democratic National Convention. She's arrested several times there. She's, eventually serves some time in prison in Atlanta. And, I think a potential historical era that we can now see is that Atlanta's Key Road detention facility where she's housed decides to house these anti-abortion protesters together away from the general population. But in doing so, this gives them privacy. It gives them time to talk, to strategize. And coming from that prison in Atlanta, out comes what's referred to by the Department of Homeland Security as the Army of God manual. The Department of Homeland Security has characterized this group as a terrorist group. And, Shelley is a member, and it advocates for assassinations of doctors. It advocates for burning down clinics, for stalking, really, violent crimes against people who work in abortion care. And so Shelley, protests. She goes to Wichita and protests during the Summer of Mercy with Operation Rescue. But, at some point, for Shelley, protests are not going to cut it anymore. And she begins setting fire to several clinics throughout the Pacific Northwest. And then, after Clinton is elected, he then appoints Ruth Bader Ginsburg to the Supreme Court. And, within 10 days of Ginsburg being confirmed to the court, Shelley travels on a Greyhound bus from Oregon to Oklahoma City. She gets out, she rents a car, she drives to Wichita, Kansas. She has a wig and she stands outside George Tiller's clinic. George Tiller provided, was that doctor we mentioned earlier, who provided abortions later in pregnancy for, either to save the life of the mother or because the fetus would not survive outside the body. And she goes there with the intent to assassinate Tiller. He leaves the clinic at the end of the day, and he's in his truck, and Shelley starts approaching the car, and he thinks that she's going to hand him, that he had protesters there all the time, that she's just another one of these people that's going to hand him a pamphlet, condemning abortion. And I guess he was pretty fed up with it because he sticks his middle fingers up, both of them, flips her the bird saying, fuck you. And it's at that exact moment when he raises his hands into the air with his middle fingers flying that Shelley reaches into her purse, grabs her gun, and aims at his heart to shoot him. His arms, I interviewed the prosecutor in this case, and she said that the way his arms were positioned probably saved his life. He becomes filled with bullet holes. Shelley gets back into her rental car. A nurse was able to write down her license plate. She drives to Oklahoma City, where she's then apprehended, and she tells the police if there ever was a justifiable homicide, that would have been it. She has no remorse. She told pretty much everyone that she could that she shot Tiller, that she was proud of it. And she winds up getting sentenced to 10 years in prison for attempted murder. And she actually gets 20 additional years for arson of multiple, I think it was like at least 6 to 8 clinics. I can't remember the exact number, but yeah, she gets, 20 years and for that. And she was released from prison in 2018. So she is now out on the street.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And so she, she was one of the, most violent extremists in the anti-abortion movement.
Do you want to say a couple things? One, obviously, I am not stoked that Dr. Tiller was shot. That is not. Yes. That's not. But what does make me feel stoked, and I think is so kind of cool about the story, is that the fact that he was giving her 2 middle fingers saved his life because the bullets entered his arms instead of hitting him like center mass, which was her intention. I actually have a friend who was shot in a robbery and survived. Same, he wasn't given the middle finger, but he put his arm out like to try to, I don't know, I guess it's like human instinct. I don't know what he did, but
Right.
But he put his arm out and the bullet entered into his arm instead of his chest and bounced off his bone. And so that's how he lived. So I don't know if there's a takeaway here, guys. If you're getting shot at, put your arms out.
Put your arms out.
I don't know. Don't listen to me. That's bad advice. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it's it's kind of mind blowing, and Shelley. Shelley does that summer that Ginsburg is confirmed to the court. But earlier that exact summer, a different abortion provider was murdered, actually successfully killed. And his name was Dr. David Gunn, and he worked in Pensacola, Florida. And a year before Operation Rescue had been across the border in Alabama, across the border from Pensacola, and they were handing out wanted posters with his face on it and with his name, with his address, home, and work. So yeah, like you mentioned earlier, like Randall Terry, he doesn't seem to get his hands really dirty in when it comes to potentially pulling a trigger, but he definitely is encouraging violence. And I asked Randall about this in the show. I said, when doctors are killed, like, you say you want to remain nonviolent, but like, what your rhetoric and kind of the materials you hand out seems pretty violent. And he's like, I condemn the murder of doctors, but then in the next breath he says, but they reaped what they sowed.
Yeah,
these guys were mass murderers, and they'll have to be judged by God. And so yeah, I mean, that's kind of the state of what abortion access was like in the mid-90s. The following year, it becomes the most deadly year on record to date in American history for accessing abortion. Multiple people were murdered, as well as shot. Like, some person was just walking in with her friend, not even to get an abortion. It was to get, healthcare, birth control, whatever. And she was shot walking into a clinic. So it becomes a really dangerous time in the mid
Yeah.
90s.
And I'm not going to say one way or another whether I think he is deliberately or was deliberately inciting, but one could argue that he was perpetrating stochastic terrorism by getting others to do what he didn't want to do himself because he wanted to stay in the limelight, not in the prison cells. But hey, back to Larry. Just
Right.
back to Larry. All right, smuggling the pill into the United States was not his only plan. He has secretly created his own lab in New York State and recruited his own chemist to develop an American version of mifepristone. I have the hardest time saying pharmaceutical names. Like whenever it's like the real name, I'm like,
Yeah, honestly, same. Like you don't hear it in the podcast, but I had to do many takes to say mifepristone. I've gotten better at it now, but it was a learning experience.
mifepristone. It's easier to say the other one, the UA
RU
whatever.
486,
RU
yeah.
486. Okay. I'm falling off the tracks here, and I didn't want to. We had said obviously like the population council and Larry had sort of diverged. They were kind of in a more covert and more kind of professional, maybe you might want to say, like more a little bit more serious, avoiding media attention. And Larry's over here kind of also, I think, practically committing another serious crime. However, Larry, he did it. Like they made an American version of the pill. Uh, Population Council managed to get a patent on their own American version of the pill. Neither of these things, of course, are approved by the FDA. But Larry and the Population Council managed to finally come together in a lot of ways in their separate efforts to create an American version of the pill. How did they finally, after 12 years of struggling, manage to get the pill approved by the FDA?
Yeah, so the Population Council, it's this group that works in research around, reproduction. They actually were the group to help bring the IUD to market, which is a form of long-term birth control that lots of people use today. And so the European company, when they're trying to bring Allegra to market, as we mentioned before, they're getting all this like heat from anti-abortion groups, and they're like, we're done with this. We're unloading the patent to the abortion pill. We don't want to deal with it anymore. We're done. They give it to the Population Council, and the Population Council, then gets to work of, finding a manufacturer, doing, all the things you need to do to actually bring a drug to market. Larry is, he has his own version, as you just mentioned, that he creates in a secret lab in a warehouse in a small town outside of New York City. Again, when I was looking into this story, I was like, wait, there's a Breaking Bad element? Are you serious? Like
he did a Ocean's 11 and a Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
He seems so cool. And he was a World War II veteran, right? Like he fought like in
Yeah.
France or something. Yeah,
Yeah.
he sounds like such a rad guy, man. I can't
Yeah.
believe I can't believe that I never heard of Larry Later until like I'd heard your story about Larry Later. Like, how could someone
Yeah.
this rad be like not a name I know? Anyway, I'm sorry.
Right,
I didn't mean to
kind of
interrupt.
forgotten to history. Yeah, but yeah, so he like what he does with this secret lab is like once he comes back from Europe with Leona Benton, they attempt to overturn the pill, the abortion pill ban by challenging it in the courts. They fail ultimately in 1992. But Larry had secretly kept an extra dose of the abortion pill. I spent a year reporting on the story. I have no idea how he did this. I talked to his attorney that represented him at the time. I talked to Leona's attorney. I talked to his wife. Like, we don't know, but he was able to, secretly smuggle in an extra dose of the pill, and he still has it, after they lose this court case. And so he'd actually been kind of laying the groundwork for this secret lab for quite a while. And he finds like 500 square feet of raw space. It's sandwiched in between a plastics plant and a vintage car mechanic. He's like, this is perfect. If I need equipment, supplies delivered, nobody's going to blink an eye because, where I am. I'm actually the first journalist to uncover the location of this lab. Like was lost to history before this. Like I found it going through his old papers in Smith College. I wasn't even really sure it still, those papers existed. But yeah, he like outfits this lab and then he hires two chemists. One, this guy named Dr. David Horn, he worked at Columbia University. He was an expert in this kind of stuff of being able to synthesize chemicals to make medication. But Dr. Horn, like, yeah, he works at Columbia University. He doesn't have time to like work in the lab full time. So Larry's got to find like another guy that can be like the boots on the ground, the day-to-day guy. And so he finds this doctor and he gives him the pseudonym Dr. X. And I actually was able to identify him and I spoke with him on the phone, but he said that he did not want his identity revealed because he's still concerned about anti-abortion attacks. But yeah, they basically break down in this tiny lab in a warehouse the exact chemical composition for the abortion pill. Because like, it's kind of like, there's a formula to medication. Like, David Horton said, like, what's the recipe with Coca-Cola? Like you need to know what the formula is in order to make it.
Yeah.
They're able to do it. And Larry, while the population council is waiting to get everything off the ground, Larry's like, we got to keep this issue in the news. We got to maintain a momentum. So he, makes this replica, this first American-made abortion pill, and he starts. He actually gets a blessing from the FDA to conduct research trials. And that information then can be given to the Population Council to bolster its application to the FDA. So by the time it actually does, it's a years-long process thereafter, but by the time it actually does get approved, there's so much research and studies that shows that this medication is safe, that it's effective, and that women actually prefer it to, having a surgical abortion. But yeah, like, again, like, the fact that like, part of the application to the FDA included like this research that like comes from like this pill that was initially developed in this secret lab. I'm like, wow, like this is so badass. And like, this is such a cool piece of American history that I didn't know about. And yeah, so that's kind of, how it winds up getting over the line. The Population Council, they're the official ones to bring it across the line. They had some issues along the way. They had like brought in this investor and it turned out like he did like a shady land deal in North Carolina and then he's got to get kicked off the project and they're suing each other. And I remember when I learned about that, I was like, are you serious? Like it's taken all this time and this like one dude fucks it up for everybody. But then finally, like literally a few weeks before the election between Al Gore and George W. Bush, which we all know how that turned out, literally 6 weeks before the pill finally gets approved. I think that had it not gotten approved at that time, we probably might not even have it today. So yeah.
The last moments of Bill Clinton's presidency, like God. Oh my God, what a journey. But I do have to say, just to everyone listening, like we have left out so much. This is a great series, and I have to highly recommend everybody to go check out The Pill Plot, hosted by TJ Raphael. It's part of the Cover Up. How does that work? Why is it part of the Cover Up?
Yeah, so it's just kind of a thing that Sony did. I don't I don't really know. Like I was like, okay, yeah, like Cover Up, I guess, is a series that every season is a different story. So season 2 is The Pill Plot.
Yeah.
And it looks at like kind of hidden pieces of history or hidden kind of like scandals and things like that. And so obviously this one is a hidden piece of history that I don't think a lot of people know. And yeah, I mean, if you're still listening to the podcast at this point and you're interested, I would encourage you to listen to the full series. Like you said, there's so much more that goes into the actual plot, and it really feels like an action movie. And it blows my mind that it's all actually true on top of it. Like
oh my God, that somebody would write this. It should be a movie. It should be a movie. You just gave me an idea. I don't know if I can actually pull this off, but man, I would love to try to see if I could turn this into a screenplay.
Yeah.
I mean, because
Yeah,
it
you
should
should. I mean,
be.
so Sony, they try to option podcasts all the time, so you can hit them up and see if
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can
Oh,
get it.
yeah.
I no longer work with Sony. They laid me off a week after the show came out.
Oh,
So,
bastards.
yeah, no, that's just part of podcasting right now. There's lots of there
Yeah.
had been lots of layoffs, but it's okay. I actually signed a contract in late December with one of the largest podcast production houses in the world, and I'm currently reporting on my next series, which will come out later this year. So I landed on my feet, which
Ooh,
is all good.
I cannot wait. Well, that leads me to my final and most important question, which is, where can people like find you, follow you, check out your work? Like, I know you have other stuff out there, and just I'm sure people would love to check it out. So, I don't know why I keep
Yeah.
making this question
Yeah,
longer and longer.
I'll plug myself. Yeah, I mean, you can, follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it nowadays, at TJ Raphael, and that's spelt like the Ninja Turtle or the painter. Or you can follow me on Instagram at TJ Raphs, RAPHS. Or check out my website at tjraphael.com. I have a form you can fill out where you'll be updated, when I release a project. The next thing that I'm working on that'll come out later this year, I can't talk too much about it, but I can say that it relates to what has been called to me a baby selling operation run by one of the nation's most powerful institutions. So I've been doing about 9 months so far of research into that, and I'll be reporting on that for the next year, and I'll be releasing that as a series. As well as I'm editing a new true crime podcast about the son of Chicago's greatest mafia hitman and his life growing up in the mafia. So I'm working on that. I'm also working on a couple other projects. So yeah, my website, you can sign up to be kind of alerted when my stuff comes out. And I hope you listen to the pill plot. If you like it, leave a rating and review. If you don't, please do not leave a rating and review. No, I'm just kidding. And you can also check out, one of my first podcasts, Biohacked Family Secrets. That's a crazy story too. My college friend took a 23andMe test and found out that her biological father was actually a anonymous sperm donor, and she has 150 siblings. And yeah, and that's
Whoa.
kind of where the series kicks off, and then we go into a lot of other crazy places with genius experiments, with lawsuits about wrongful life, deaths of donors, questions about shame, people buying sperm on Facebook. It becomes really crazy. So I would check that
Wow.
one out as well. Biohacked Family Secrets.
Okay, I'm gonna check it out.
Yay.
I knew that you had made I had seen it. I saw like biohacked with your name on it, but
Mhm.
I haven't listened to it, so I didn't even know that's what it was about. I was just like, it just the word biohacked sounds so cool. I was like, I'll probably like this. But now I'm like, I mean, I'm definitely like, this is on my
Yeah,
list.
it's wild. Like when my friend Amber, she was a college classmate of mine. Like we're not super close. I hadn't seen her honestly in almost like a decade, and like we reconnected and we were hanging out. And I was like, "What's new with you?" And she's like, "Oh, I just found out my dad's not my dad, and I probably have 150 siblings." And I was like, "Whoa!" I was like,
Whoa.
"Can I record you?" Because I'm a nosy journalist. And yeah, and then I actually wound up over the course of 5 years working on that story with her. So that's a crazy one to check out. And yeah, the baby selling thing that's going to come out late 2024 will, I think, also be pretty crazy. So yeah.
All right, guys. While we're waiting on the new one, go check out Pill Plot and Biohacked. And TJ, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're very busy. I know you've got like a really important source you have to talk to like in a few minutes. So I know I
Yes.
got to let you go.
Mhm.
But thank you so much, and I hope you can enjoy the great weather and the awesome weekend.
Thank you too. I really appreciate you having me, and this was really fun. And you ever want me to come back, I would be happy to do it. So, and thank you to your listeners for listening. So, yeah, thanks.